Welcome to the MetaMint. Stay a while, learn something new. OpenAI has released its Stargate Community Plan, a $500 billion initiative to secure physical infrastructure required for artificial intelligence. The strategy centers on domestic energy production and grid stability to mitigate the impact of massive data center clusters on local utilities. By funding its own power transmission and storage, OpenAI is positioning itself to bypass public infrastructure constraints. This move represents a significant play in the geopolitical landscape, as control over energy and hardware supply chains becomes the primary bottleneck for global AI dominance. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei criticized the current U.S. administration's decision to permit NVIDIA to sell H200 chips to China. This policy shift marks a departure from previous export restrictions. The chip was under a blanket export ban to China to prevent them from closing the compute gap required for AI training. The policy replaces that ban with a framework of financial incentives and volume caps. Among other policy changes, China sales cannot exceed 50% of U.S. domestic sales, and a 25% revenue cut is to be paid directly to the United States government. Currently, the U.S. has roughly a 40-to-1 compute advantage over China. If China acquires 1 to 2 million H200 units, that lead could shrink to as little as 1.2-to-1 by late 2026. The 40-to-1 ratio surfaced in early 2026 reports from the Council on Foreign Relations. Because of the 2024 to 2025 bans, China was restricted to older or neutered chips, like the H20, which have roughly 1/9 the compute density of the H100. When you calculate the raw mathematical operations per second available to US labs compared to Chinese labs, the disparity becomes prevalent. As this gap of computing power narrows, investors and policymakers alike are pivoting from a race for software to a struggle for industrial scale. Anders Puck Nielsen, a Danish military analyst, views the current crisis over Greenland not as a logical policy debate, but as a dangerous convergence of strategic intent, personal narcissism, and institutional incompetence. The desire for control is inextricably linked to Greenland's natural resources and rare earth elements. Nielsen says, while the US may want a sovereign compute stack anchored in Greenland, the current aggressive approach is more likely to result in a destructive tariff war than a successful acquisition. In Minnesota, the state and federal government have reached a legal impasse over the scale of Operation Metro Surge. Late Monday, the U.S. Department of Justice dismissed a state-led lawsuit to halt the operation as legally frivolous, even as Minnesota's Attorney General continues to build a case against what he terms a federal overreach. This policy shift follows a high-profile incident in St. Paul, where ICE agents forced entry into a home without a warrant. Footage captured agents removing 57-year-old U.S. citizen Scott Tao at gunpoint, forcing him into sub-zero temperatures in only his underwear. Though Department of Homeland Security claimed he matched a suspect's description, Tao, who has no criminal record, was released an hour later. In a significant move to de-escalate, U.S. District Judge Catherine Menendez has issued a 72-hour directive for federal agents to adjust their conduct. The order specifically bars the arrest of peaceful observers and prohibits the use of non-lethal munitions on non-violent crowds unless probable cause is established. Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto is in London today to sign a maritime partnership agreement. The deal includes cooperation with the United Kingdom on fishing vessel construction and deep-sea research. The core of the partnership involves the construction of over 1,000 advanced vessels for Indonesia's fishing fleet. Combining large-scale industrial manufacturing, food security, and regional defense, this £4 billion deal marks a new phase in Indo-Pacific strategic autonomy. That's the briefing for today. Source links in the description below.